I love it.
Hi, everyone who's joining. I was just telling the story of my first litter of foster kittens. Um, and hopefully there's more foster kittens in my life, because today I had the first time, speaking of self-care, today was my first experience of having my hoodie on backwards by complete accident, because I was so sleepy. And I put a cat in the hoodie, and it was so
Oh,
great to snuggle the cat while it couldn't
yes.
escape.
Love it.
Anyway, hi everyone who's joining. We will give it a minute because I need to settle down my energy, because morning hashtag 2020 is behind us. I don't know. But hello, tell us where you're coming from. Tell us your name, and maybe tell us one thing you've done so far this year to be good to yourself. So leave a comment. What have you done this year so far to be good to yourself? Because today we're talking about self-care. So let's start off with something positive. And one thing that I've done for myself is, well, catch the cats.
Mm-hmm.
What have I done for myself? Today I put on makeup. First time I'm putting on makeup today, and I feel it's so funny. Like, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but today's all about self-care. And for me, when I'm feeling crappy, I do like to dress up, or I like putting on makeup, even if I'm not on camera, because it just, I don't know, lifts my spirit. Like, for me, it is something that that helps me emotionally. So I decided today that I'm gonna do full enchilada. I don't know how I did, because I'm out of practice after a month. But that's something I did. Tracy and Beth, why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us one thing that you've done for yourself this year so far?
Sure. So I'm Tracy. I'm located in what is now known as Vancouver, Canada. I do want to acknowledge that it is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. One thing that I have done for myself this year, well, I've continued my meditation practice, and I think that was that's something that I've really been working on over the last couple of years. But it was especially a little bit challenging in the beginning of the year because of family and activities and a little bit too much wine on New Year's Eve and all of the rest. But I've been finding that is the one area of self-care that I've been really consistent with. And I too did my makeup today, which always helps me just feel like I'm taking a moment to focus on myself, which is nice. Over to you, Beth.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. I'm Beth, based in Minneapolis, Dakota homeland and territory. Let's see. I got dressed in something other than jeans and a favorite old t-shirt today, just for the heck of it. And even from the waist down, right? Not just zoom up. So I was like, why not? I even have shoes on. Well, actually they're off now because I'm sitting cross-legged.
I'm in sweats.
Hi, Molly. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just was like, I'm not sure how many times since March when I started working at home I've done that.
Yeah.
So also, though, I've been doing some more mosaicing. I see some of you talking about, feeding your creativity. And that's been really good for me. And just really feeding my centering and grounding practices on a regular basis, including meditation or walking in nature or yoga, just really making sure that that is built into my day, which I don't know about some of you, but I know that needs to be there all the time. Mm-hmm. And when I get really busy, sometimes that's the first thing that goes. So really trying intentionally to set that up. And thanks for including me. Great to see all of you here.
Awesome. So good to see everyone. And our lovely panelists today, Tracy and Beth, who'll be doing most of the talking, I hope, because I'm a bit disheveled this morning, as witnessed by my hoodie backwards and resulting cat in the hoodie. But today is our first webinar of 2021, which is already exciting. But what's also really exciting is that today we're going to focus on the people who are really in the audience. Our webinars tend to be a lot about what we can do for our clients, how we can be better for our clients. And even this business of coaching series, we tend to talk about, how do we grow our business? Again, focused on this thing that isn't necessarily us. And today I wanted us to start off the new year by focusing on us, on the coaches. And frankly, if anyone's watching this now or later on YouTube, if you're not a coach, I think you're going to get value out of this too, because we are going to be talking about taking care of ourselves and why it's important and how to do it. And if we don't do it, what can happen? The funny part is I get the feeling that a lot of us, I know that I'm in this group, we do know what we need to do to take care of ourselves. We do know that self-care is important, but practice what you preach is often a little bit harder to do than to say. So let's take the opportunity today to talk about it and hopefully get some action points of how all of us can be better to ourselves and know that it's the right thing to do, just so that we can be happy and function, but also be good to our clients and to our families, etc. So everybody wins, win, win, win. So maybe let's start with kind of foundational stuff. Beth and Tracy, we invited both of you to this webinar because you understand how important this is, and you both do different things to practice self-care and to help others practice self-care. So why don't we start with why is self-care important, and especially for coaches? Beth, Tracy.
I can jump in. So when we were chatting about this prior, Beth brought up a really good point, which I think I'd love for us to talk about, and that is the definition of self-care, because it can mean a lot of different things. And I used to think of it kind of about self-pampering, and not to say that self-pampering is a bad thing, but having a hot bath, giving yourself a manicure, doing all of these sorts of things, like Beth, you said, getting a massage, all of those things can be a component of self-care, but self-care can be a lot deeper than that, should be a lot deeper than that. And so that's a lot of what I've been considering lately. And I think when you asked, Magda, why is it important? There's that old adage of the oxygen mask that I like to think about, like, how can we, especially if we're in a helping profession, so as coaches or however we're showing up, how can we be there for others if we're depriving ourselves, for one? But also just like what I'm starting to learn about compassion, and this is very much, I'm a student in this, is that in order really to be a compassionate human and to show compassion for others, that compassion really has to start with self. And that kind of shows up in all of the ancient practices, and it's substantiated by like research as well. So I think it's just important for us as human beings to make sure that we're caring for ourselves in order to be there for the system.
Yeah, I really agree and resonate with that. I've been in a lot of conversations and done a lot of work around this, the way that self-care has gotten defined, at least in a lot of the West, certainly in the US. Not only is it, you called it self-pampering, I think it's also often really commodified in ways that, like, if you don't have money, you can't do it. If you don't have leisure time, you can't do it. Also, it often, and I say this as someone who loves massages, so like, it's not that I don't participate in that, not that I can afford them all the time, but also it's something that we do so that we can go right back to working at full tilt, right? And instead of being something that gets integrated into how we are in the world. And so lately I've really been thinking about, like, I've been really resonating with the word nourished, Like, what does it feel like? Not even the term self-care, but like, what does it feel like to be nourished, to fully resourced, as whole as you can possibly be? And I invite you as participants for us all to reflect on that, right? What does that feel like? How do you know when you're there? And how can you be in the world? What is your being like in the world when you feel fully nourished? How are you a coach? How does that inform your coaching? How does that inform your relationships? How does that inform, all of that? And I think the other thing that becomes really important for me is, often the way self-care is talked about in a lot of the circles I'm in is very individualized, self-care. And what does it mean then to really reframe that as communities of care? How do we care for each other? How do we take care of ourselves and others so that maybe we don't need so much of that individualized escape to come back to the constant hyper productivity that we always do, but instead we reframe how we care for ourselves and each other and the environment around us so that it's actually integrated into everything we do. Now, that's a vision, an aspirational vision for me. It doesn't mean I always do that. I just had a coaching session this week where someone was like, how can we do that more effectively for you? Like, it's an aspiration, but it does help me really approach it in different ways.
I can relate to that, because for me, when I know I'm out of balance, when I'm snappy, and I tend to feel emotions very physically. So sometimes it's my throat, it feels like it's closing up. Sometimes it's the pain in the chest. Sometimes it's a headache. It's different things manifest differently. And I know that it shows up by annoying my parents or my sister. Or yesterday, I know that I was very snappy with an employee. And if she's on here, I am very, very sorry yet again. But I realized as I was doing it, I realized that I wasn't being very kind, and it was completely my fault. And I tried to apologize later, but what's done is done. Like, anyway, moving on. So, even going through all the stuff we go through in coach training and having self-awareness, I still fail to practice self-care on a regular basis. I am lucky to have my sister. You mentioned the communities of care. So my sister and I live together, and she knows me so well at this point that sometimes I just turn around and there she is, literally standing with a cat or a glass of wine or a piece of cake, because she knows what's going to help at the right moment. And it's amazing. And I'm so lucky to have that. But as you're learning how to do this for yourself better, are there any particular things that have worked for you to have that higher awareness of, I need self-care right now, or I need to reach out, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D? Are there any things that you can tell us that are working for you?
Sure. I think that the one thing, and I was reflecting on this actually yesterday, also in a coaching session where I was being coached. And the one thing that has worked for me in an amazing way is meditation. And, Beth, you talked about hyper productivity. Everything else that I've done that has, whether it's been associated to self-care or not, but any sort of routine that I've done that's, for myself, is linked to results. So it's always connected to, if it's exercise, it's, wanting to get stronger or look a certain way, or, even in yoga, it's like deepening a position and all of these types of things. And with meditation, even though, yes, absolutely, of course, I see the results of that, it doesn't show up in an obvious way. It's not something that I can quantify or I can measure. And it's still a practice that I really find I have to talk myself into every single day. But it is one of the ways that I think that I know, and you talked about community care, I know I show up in a different way in the world when I meditate versus when I don't. so that for me has been, I think, the biggest learning of my life so far, is just that I really need to spend that time um, with myself in quiet and not trying to be productive. I would love to hear from others kind of what's working for them.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it's a practice, and the practice can take a lot of different forms. I also meditate, I practice yoga, I walk in nature. For me, having my hand on my purring cat is like an immediate, it's like my co-regulator. It just calms me. Joy, creativity, like it can take a lot of different forms. But I need to make it a practice where the process of doing it is what's important, not the productivity model, which again, I think is a framework that we've learned and inherited often. And also, I want to reiterate the point you said about why we do it. Like sometimes I mentioned that when I get really, really busy, that it's easy to push that aside. But I also know that I am more skillful and more generous and more whole at everything else I do if I do these practices. That it's not a takeaway. It's not something I need to squeeze in. It really should be my foundation of everything I do. And I like that the comment I just saw. By the way, I one of the invitations I've given to myself this year is to multitask a little less. So I can't exactly read the chat and talk at the same time, but I did happen to see that you can meditate while doing other things. It's being present, right? So yes, absolutely. It doesn't have to be an add-on. It can be a way you approach something else you do, just a state of being, cultivating that self-awareness and maybe having the cues of somebody else in your life. You mentioned your sister, Magda, like really having a conversation with people about like, when I'm like this is what would be helpful to me. And how can I reciprocate with you, right? So that we can, and then, having some graciousness with each other when we do get crabby or cranky or, whatever else. Cause, hi, absolutely. I do that. So trying to just bring some generosity and compassion to that process.
There is a question coming up from the audience. And by the way, please add in your questions. I am trying to multitask. So Tracy, if you could have more of the conversation, I'll make sure I stay on the chat. Someone's asking about how do you break the loop that you are aware that you are stuck in? So you know that self-care is important, but you're not doing it. And you know you should be doing it. How do you break the loop?
Oh, that is a good one. Because I think that has been where I've struggled. I have this conversation with myself where I tell myself all the things that I need to do, and then I also ignore myself. So for me, breaking the loop, what has worked for me and what I know has also worked with friends, with clients, is just even trying to introduce one small thing at a time and do that on a regular basis. So that can be, not everyone resonates with meditating, but going for walks or reading a book, like anything that you can sort of take that time to nourish yourself and do it on a regular basis. But try not to, one of the things that I have done in the past, and we talked about hyperproductivity, is I commit to like this brand new routine and I try to do all these things at once and end up not doing any of them. So I think that what has been the most successful for me is just a little bit at a time on a regular basis. What about you, Beth?
Oh my gosh, I so resonate with the overcommit. Like I'm like, go big, go fast, right? And almost every time when I do it that way, it doesn't work. So the mini practices, as well as some longer ones when I can, but the integrating it in has been really helpful. I also, I think for me, I have, because of a lot of the work I do is very intellectual and in my head, I can know things and not embody them. And so really working to embody them. And I think for me, when it feeds me and shifts my being, then it's like, I want more of that. Right. And so like that becomes the motivator, that it helps me shift from the stressed, depleted, whatever, into something that feels better. That is much more of a motivator than the should language in my head, right? Which just pushes me to shame and frustration and super not helpful. The other thing I've really been noticing is the difference between what different self-care practices for me can do. So I like to watch a lot of Netflix and read crappy books. And I say crappy because like anything with, I was a literature student, so like there's a way in which it can become work if it's not like, escape. And escape can be really helpful for me because it gets me out of my head, but too much of it doesn't actually nourish me. So the difference between what actually nourishes and refills my well and what just kind of gets me in this kind of zone out mode, right? Which again is not entirely bad, but too much of it doesn't do this other thing. So really kind of balance the two has been helpful for me, because the feeding me refills my well, which then becomes the motivator for doing it more.
I love that. I love that you were speaking about that should language, because I've really been thinking a lot, and this is a very recent sort of conversation that I've been having in my head about the language that I use with myself. And that's something that I've been reflecting on, really trying to. It's a new year, so you always think about new practices, but also for me, I'm going to be 50 in a week, and so I'm entering a new decade and a new, what is it, a quint, some, I don't know, anyway. And so kind of the learnings that I've taken from up until now, I become a lot more aware of the language that I use. And I speak to myself in a way that I would be embarrassed to speak to other people, quite honestly. And so, when you were talking about these escapes that you do, so like the Netflix, for me, that's Netflix or books. Like I always feel like, oh, if I'm going to read, I should be reading something about coaching or about meditation or about this or about that. And, or, if I'm going to be taking time to be on screen, it should be a webinar, it should be this. And that should shows up a lot. And then even when I actually just, sometimes I can't take it anymore and I just decide that I'm going to zone out. And when I zone out, my head is full of language that's blame. Then it switches to, you should be doing something else. You're wasting time and everything else. So I'm trying to be more like, and I cringe when I'm like set dates with myself, but almost really set aside time where it's like I give myself permission to just flake out, and enjoy it and enjoy it. So,
Well, that really speaks to the shame, the should and the shame narrative is huge for me. And I notice it's not only the language that I talk to myself with, but the tone, and then how I feel after that, right? So really kind of reframing how, like turning down the volume of one tape and turning up the volume of another is some of the language that I use, because I can't always do it. And the more depleted I get, the more that should shaming becomes. So again, coming back to that, the more I self-care, practice self-care, the more generous I can be with everyone, myself included. But also this, like, part of the human experience should be joy. part of the human experience should be being able to watch Netflix if we want to without productivity being attached. And I think that I don't know if this is true of every person and everyone everywhere in the world, but I know for me, the hyper productivity should produce work. The idea that being able to read a book is not something I should allow myself, right? Like that's a learned narrative that I don't want to participate in. It's taking a lot to unlearn it because it's reinforced all around us. But I think there's a whole initiative or campaign, this beautiful NAP ministry that if you're interested, they talk about, especially for marginalized groups, rest as resistance, which is a whole nother campaign as well, like reframing the narrative, right? That we deserve to be able to read a book, to be able to rest. And that's part of what we are allowed. I'm seeing should in the chat. Thank you.
Should is I can relate to all what you're saying as well. Someone had asked about what do you do if you know what your triggers are, and I wanted to kind of riff on that a little bit because again, I think I'm pretty self-aware, but I still put myself in situations where I know that there's not going to be a good outcome. And for me, unfortunately, the kind of these little rewards, whatever, flaking out, I think, as Tracy said, often lead to that. So yes, of course, Netflix, but the annoying thing about that is that then I see some titles that then make me overthink. For me, looking at I love photography, always have. Looking at Instagram is definitely a pleasure for me. I love looking at architecture and animals and everything else. But inevitably, I will get targeted by an ad for ASPCA or something else, and I'll see the abused pup or some other horrific thing done to an animal, and that really gets me depressed, which then leads me to want to share something, so I end up on Facebook. And when I end up on Facebook, that's when I see a lot of the content around animals being abused. And then what I feel is complete, like, I just get completely drained, first of all. And that's when, for me, the guilt and the should kicks in, because I'm thinking, okay, well, I should be spending my time. If I'm going to be on social media, I should be sharing this stuff that is super depressing to bring awareness, to do my part to end it, because it's wrong and it needs to stop. And who am I to just ignore it? It's going to keep happening if people have that attitude. So I get in this crazy, loop, I guess, where looking at fluffy creatures makes me really happy. But I'm going to be finding people who are not so nice to have two fluffy creatures, and that's going to make me completely depressed and have the complete opposite effect. And I know this is going to happen, and I do it on a regular basis. And I've now committed to myself at least to be off of Facebook, and I've been good. I still automatically share things from my Instagram, but I'm not looking at comments and things on Facebook, and it's been a week. So fingers crossed. But I know that I'm going to fall back into this because I didn't magically stop caring about abused animals. I didn't magically stop realizing that social media is what it is. It is the way that we spread information and misinformation in this day and age. It's not going away. If I want to be part of the solution to raise awareness to what is happening and continues to happen, I will need to get back into that space. And it's just like, what next? It's killing me.
I hear that. I really hear that. I hear that pain and that frustration and that depression and the responsibility for making change. I do a lot of social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I teach gender and women's studies, and we have this conversation all the time because it's a privilege to step away. The people and the beings who are harmed by this don't get to step away. They don't get to be like, kind of tired today. Can you, harm me tomorrow? That doesn't get to happen. So I think one of the lessons that my students have shared with me over the years is, one, to recognize that pain is part of the process and to not judge ourselves for that pain. but also to recognize that that pain is often a motivator to create change, and that it can be catalyzed into something, but it can also pull us down into that quicksand of, like, I feel immobilized, I can't ever get away from it, I'm not skillful, it doesn't, and so one of the ways that I've tried to address that is, one, spend as much time learning about the creative, empowering, community-based work that's being done to solve the problem as I do learning about the problem, right? Because I can spend all my time going down the hole of learning about, racism or animal cruelty or ableism. And it's important that I know all those things. But if all I do is study the problem, I get super disempowered. So if I can also look at, wow, there are amazing creative initiatives out there that is doing really important work. So if I also, feed that part, that's really important. Another thing that we talk about is kind of, what can I reach and touch right now? Right? The really big issues also have to be addressed, but in my circles of influence, where can I create difference? And then also just kind of, this goes back to the should thing, allowing ourselves a little bit of time away from some of it, because we didn't create the systems of oppression, and one of the ways they function is to bring us down, and we do need to be aware of that. But joy is also like, what is it we want instead? What is the dream? And part of that dream is like joy or liberation, or, I don't know, what words would you put in there? And we don't get to wait until it's all over to start creating that, right? How do we begin to create that in the process, right? As we're lessening the pain and harm, how do we also create the other things? And so, I don't know, like you said earlier, giving permission, right, to be able to do some of this stuff, and know that we'll come back to it. We have to. So those are just a few of the things, but other people probably have some.
I love so much what you said about how we don't need to wait to experience this, because a lot of times, for myself anyway, it's always like, and when this happens, I'll be happier, or things will be better, or, the system will be fixed, or all of these things. It's always an and then process. And that's what leaves us feeling really helpless, I think, sometimes, because it's like we're never reaching that moving target, or we ourselves are not in a position to be able to get there just on our own. And so we stay in the pain. And I can relate a lot to that, because I find that I kind of go between, I have to shut everything off. I can't go on, I literally try to just go on social media to like access Messenger or post something, but I try not to get too caught up in it. And I have to stay away from the news and all of this stuff. But then I'm putting myself into like a little bit of a cave, essentially, and I'm not being aware of what's out there, and that doesn't serve anyone. But then when I'm sort of taking it all in, I shut down, and then that also doesn't serve anyone. So it's like finding that balance, and I'm finding, for me, actually allowing myself to feel the pain and experience it, and allowing it to manifest. Like letting myself cry is a very, very new thing for me. But it's really helping make a difference, in me being able to get the energy to just be able to keep going on.
What do you do if something triggers you while you're coaching someone? Because I imagine that not every coaching conversation you're having is about very practical, what do I do with my career, etc. There's some personal stuff that happens in coaching. So, I can definitely see myself tearing up when a client is talking. There's emotions that come up. What do you do in those situations?
Yeah, I've definitely had that happen. And I really have to just come back to my breath and my awareness that, you know, I sort of identify, is it me empathizing with the client? Am I sort of entering the client's world, or am I taking something that the client's saying and identifying it to my own world? And that, just that awareness helps sometimes. And when I realize that I'm in their world, then I'm able to sort of pull up a little bit. Um, when I realize that I've gone back to me, I'm able to pull out of that. So I think just sort of pulling, I'm using that word a lot, but, but coming away from that and identifying where it's coming from has helped me get back to being able to be just present with the client. What about you, Beth? Have you had that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think what you said about, being clear on our own journey and really doing our own personal work, which coaching is so much about, so that we can be clear in that moment. Is it my stuff arising? Am I empathizing with the other person? Because often the other person wants to feel empathized. Like, it's appropriate, I think, sometimes when somebody shares a really hard story that it impacts you. I mean, like, I want to be in a place where I can feel that. But when it starts to bring up my own stuff or get in the way of the process, then I need to regulate in the moment. And that, I often talk about mindfulness and meditation is like, you can't refer to it in really intense moments or draw on it as a practice if you haven't practiced it in less intense moments, right? It's an ongoing journey. And so being able to draw the practice, ground myself, take some deep breaths, as you noticed, acknowledge that it's happening if it's appropriate in the moment, that depends on the situation. And then the other thing that I sometimes do is bookend something. So if I know that a conversation is likely to arise that will get me unsettled, what are the practices I need to have in place right after the session, and make sure that that's in place. Now, of course, we can't always prepare. And I don't know about you, but for me, the more I'm depleted, the more that happens. The less I'm able to notice the triggers and bring myself back into some degree of centeredness, groundedness, or regulation, which again speaks to the why it's important to have this as a regular practice, so that our well is as full as possible, so that we can do that. Because the more depleted we get, at least for me, the more I fall back on habit, the more susceptible I am to triggers, and it just becomes less helpful for everyone all around.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when I've identified some patterns in my life that have been sort of, we call them like winning formulas for me, but not, so they've gotten me through my, they've advanced me in my career, and they've helped me be productive as we talk about all of this stuff. And it's when I'm depleted, I tend to fall back on these habits. And that's just like running on adrenaline, for example. And running on adrenaline really helped me when I worked in fashion and I was doing production, and I was dealing with people all the time, and working super long days. And when I say helped me, I mean it helped me on a day-to-day basis. It didn't help me on a personal basis, and it didn't help me when I was burning out and all of those things. But I can't now do that as a coach and be a good coach at all. And yet I find that sometimes when I'm not being mindful, I'm packing my schedule full of things. And then I notice that it makes it like, then I'm not coaching as well. And then when I'm not coaching as well, I'm judging myself for not coaching as well. And it just goes into this downward spiral. What you said about bookending, for me, I know that I have to make sure that I'm only scheduling a certain amount of coaching sessions per day, and I'm leaving a certain amount of time in between them. And I have, and I'm saying I have to, but it's hard for me to do that because I tend to look at gaps in my schedule with a tiny bit of panic for some reason. So it's definitely it's a new approach for me to do this to do this. Um, I'm just curious to know sort of what's worked for you in terms of identifying, like you said, when you're depleted, or sort of identifying that and then being able to shift out of that. Like what practices work for you in order to be aware of that.
Magda, do you want to take this or should I? Okay. Well, I get crabby. I am tired physically. I tend to be in my head more, though my body is driving things. Like my energy will be depleted, or I'll feel really sluggish, but I'll be so in my head that I don't notice it quite so much. I often will have a conversation, or I'll teach, or I'll coach, and then I'll be unhappy with how it went. And then I'll beat myself up with the shoulds. Like those are the cues for me, that like, girlfriend, you need to slow your roll, and really kind of draw on these practices that you really know are important, as opposed to when I feel more spacious, when I feel centered in, let's say, a coaching session, when maybe something doesn't go as well as I might like, and I reflect on it as a learning process instead of a, wow, you really suck as a coach kind of approach, right? Like it's a different kind of way of approaching the learning journey. I can be much more generous with other people and myself. And then what helps me do that? Meditation practices. I try to go for a walk every day. Sometimes talking with a friend about it, in a community building kind of way, things like that.
Yeah, I love what you said about reflection and the difference between that and, that beating oneself up. I tend to get caught in loops and think of them as being reflective, and that's not reflective. So I found that journaling has helped me a lot, and it's one of those things like meditation that I never want to do. It's kind of feels like a little bit of a chore, but it really helps me get my thoughts from here out. And the other thing, I have a few friends, and Magda, you're going to laugh because I know you don't love these things, but I have a few friends that our communication is all on WhatsApp audio. And so sometimes by talking about something, she hates it, but by talking about something and then replaying it, it's almost like I have these strange like self-coaching sessions with myself. And I found that that's helped. But anything that sort of helps me get that playback loop out of my head to a point where I can look at it and then sometimes realize like, hey, that doesn't make sense, or you're not being very nice to yourself, or you're being like a crappy human being to other people as well. So that helps me. I would love to talk a little bit more about, I loved what you were talking about, community compassion. And what came to mind was, we talk about, it's crazy that we have to think about self-care as opposed to just care, right? Like care should just be something that we do. Kindness is something that we should have. Compassion, and I'm saying should again, but sort of taking it out of the me and them and looking at it as us, like pulling ourselves out of ourselves and seeing ourselves in the community. And I would love to hear your thoughts on because I don't know. How do we start doing that? Like, what are ways that we can start showing up that way, where we're caring for us as opposed to for me and them?
Yeah, I first learned the term communities of care from social justice work, where many people, for anybody who does social change work, there's a lot of social issues are urgent. They're always happening. There's a lot of burnout because everything needs to be dealt with. And it came from this idea that social issues don't just impact individuals, they impact communities, and that it's difficult, especially if you're in a marginalized community, to care only for yourself when you actually also care about your loved ones who are also being hit by this issue. So how do we, take out of that individualized framework into a more collective one? And for me, that means like recognizing that we're all interconnected and we all have work to do. It's different work. And by work, I mean like personal journey stuff. And so how do I show up for my friends, for instance, in a way that will actually support them? And how do I do it in a way that feeds me as well? Because here's the other tricky pitfall for me. I'm a people pleaser, and I'm a giver to others in some ways. Like that's how I've been conditioned and socialized. And I'm an introvert. So showing up for others can reinforce my depletion if I don't do it in a way that actually feeds me. If I come from I should show up for this person, then it just like comes back to the depletion thing. But if I come from I really love this person, I want to support this person could use a meal right now because like they're isolated in the pandemic, they've got a lot of stress in their life. Maybe I could just bring them a meal just to be like, hey, I love you. Here's some nourishment, right? And I know that person will do something comparable for me somewhere down the road. There are, lots of different ways that we could do things that take it out of the individualized manicure or massage and more into the how do we care for and show up for each other. But the other piece of that is that I can't necessarily know what my community wants or needs, right? There needs to be some dialogue or community exchange around that so that I'm not guessing, right? But that like they're telling me what they want and need and I do the same. Those are some thoughts, and they might be a little more general, but or fun, right? Sometimes when I'm depleted, my wife is like, let's have a dance party. And so we'll like in our living room have a dorky dance party. So, and that is both joyful and it gets my energy up and it shifts the mood, but it maybe is something that I wouldn't have gotten myself to do, but we do it together, things like that.
I love that. Fun is something that I'm missing right now. I think with the situation that we're in, it makes it a lot harder to be connecting with friends. It makes it a lot more difficult to be spontaneous. And even just the idea of, like I said, I have a birthday coming up and somebody was saying, are you going to do a Zoom party? And I'm like, I can't even imagine anything I would want to do less. And that sounds terrible. I mean, I would love to connect with my friends, but it's like not that way. I would rather wait until we can do it again in person. But fun can mean different things. And I found that I've needed to redefine it to myself. And like I'm starting to do things like, I'm that creepy person that's in the kids' playground and I'm on a swing and I'm swinging for the heck of it. And just like,
I love swinging.
Yeah. Just identifying, just being in the moment, being spontaneous. Yeah. And I was thinking, when we think about community care, we think of ourselves as a part of the community, then in a sense, we don't risk depletion because we're in it. So it's like, if we're caring for a community that we're a part of, then we're also caring for ourselves in a beautiful way. So I really love that you brought that up, because I'm going to try to we were talking before the session about like having an abundance mindset and not always feeling like by giving to others, I'm taking from something. And I think even just for me, just sort of seeing myself within the community versus seeing something flowing from me to them, and then thinking about when, as soon as that happens, I have to think about like, how am I going to get it back, you know, which no longer is about giving in that case. So Magda, is there anything? Oh, sorry.
So I'll just say one more other thing. If you think about gardens, different plants bring different things to like the soil or to each other. One of my teachers uses the example of rotating crops, right? That if you plant the same thing in the same soil over and over and over again, it depletes it. But if you rotate the crops, then it replenishes some of the soil. And so this idea of we don't all have to bring the same thing, and we don't all have to do the same thing all the time. So Magda, to give your example, if raising awareness by sharing things on social media right now depresses you too much, what's something else you could do to address the problem that doesn't depress you, right? And that you can come back to that at another point, right? That we can rotate. And if we think about communities of care, then we also know that somebody else is going to step in and do that while we do something else, right? That because it's a collective process. Just some thoughts.
It's a great thought, and I try doing that. So foster kittens is a great way of doing that, because you're helping and you get kittens. I mean, what's better? For those of you who haven't tried sleeping with a bunch of kittens on you, oh my God, or puppies, it's the best thing in the world. Like, you don't need therapy if you have a kitten sleeping on you. Anyway, pictures of kittens sometimes, please. Yeah, I literally have several Instagram accounts because I was posting too many pictures of animals. So all my creatures now have separate accounts so that my friends don't get too annoyed with too much fluff. Anyway, we have only a few minutes to go, and I know that Beth has a hard stop. So I would like the audience to just add in any last minute thoughts and questions you may have so that Beth and Tracy can address them. But in the meantime, I wanted to just get some practical summary tip type things from both of you, because I'm a practical person. And for me, one thing that I've always known, but it took this webinar for me to really internalize it, was this whole taking a break between things. I know that I need reset time. I know I need bookends. Like, this is a logical thing I've always known, but I don't do it. And what's cool is that even in Gmail, like, you can add in buffers between meetings. No matter what software you're using to schedule your appointments, there's a setting where you can force the break that you need, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour between meetings. So an action I'm going to take after this is I'm going to add in that buffer so that I don't overschedule myself. So that's my practical thing. Tracy and Beth, is there anything practical that you want to focus on for our audience today?
Well, I didn't know about that Gmail thing, so that's great. I use Calendly, and I have that setting so that there's buffers. But unfortunately, I sometimes override that and schedule meetings in anyways. I've started making little notes on certain days when I notice that they're getting full, and those notes are for me to say, do not schedule anything, exclamation point. And so that does help. That does help a lot. Practical things that I do, we've already talked about meditation. Nature is huge, and it's just remembering to get out there. And when I was in Toronto at the beginning of COVID, and I was downtown and I was finding it hard to even get to nature, I literally would, just walk around the neighborhood. And when no one was looking, I would go up to a tree and just put my hand on the trees. And just, I found that kind of fed me. And then having my dog is invaluable, because anytime I feel like I need a moment, I can just go and cuddle with her. As I was saying to Magda, she's super cuddly right now because it's cold out. And in a way that's I think amazing, amazing community care, because she loves it and I love it as well. Beth, anything?
Totally. I'm all about the pets. And in addition to the buffers around meetings, I have taken to blocking off like a time around that will allow me to have my ritual cup of tea at a certain time or go for a walk. And I say ritual because I'm a creature of habit. And also when I make something a ritual, it adds more import to it. It's not like just habit. I'm like drinking this while I'm multitasking. It's literally the intention of it is to refill my well. And so doing some of that has been really important. That's why I don't ever talk on the phone when I go for a walk or, any of that. It's all about what it's doing for me. I also, when I was at work a couple years ago, I put a thing on the in my signature that said I'm away from email on evenings and weekends. And the amount of feedback that I got on that one signature line is probably more feedback that I've gotten in anything else in my life, because people are like, you can do that? Oh my gosh, I'm going to steal that. And I'm like, wow, the fact that we have to, that's somehow revolutionary says something about hyperproductivity. Now, the other thing is that I have to, initially I had to enforce myself to follow it. That I didn't actually answer emails on evenings and weekends. Sometimes I even shift my mail on my phone on evenings and weekends so I can't see it, or that I only see my personal account and not my work accounts or something like that. But using technology to work for us, I think is also important. And petting kittens, I can't reinforce that enough.
You are a much stronger person than I am. Like, what is this weekend you speak of? I've never heard of it. But actually, another practical thing, speaking of technology, some people don't know that Zapier exists. So I'm going to put that in, Zapier. And also there's another site, If This Then That. I love them both. Both basically are different ways of connecting different pieces of tech so that stuff happens automatically. Zapier is used more by companies where you have to do things in mass over and over again. Whereas If This Then That is more for personal, started off as more for personal use. Anyway, look at both of those, If This Then That and Zapier. And if there are things that you want to do, like Beth just described, i.e. turn my email off for whatever period of time, you don't have to remember to do that. There are tools where you literally can do that for you. So If This Then That, you could set it up if it's 5 p.m. on a Friday until 8 a.m. on a Monday, then stop notifications for all my emails, something like that, whatever works for you. So please take a look at that, because honestly, it's it can be life-changing for your business of coaching, see, tying it back, but also personal. Like, you could literally even remember anniversaries and things. If it's January 25th, send my wife flowers from books.com. See, there you go. Automate everything. Cool. So I'm going to wrap it up because Beth has to go. So thank you everyone for being here and for listening and commenting. We will get this video up on our YouTube channel, and then I would love for all of you to hop on there and share your other stories of how you're practicing self-care, because we can all learn from each other. I mean, God knows. Tracy, thank you. Beth, thank you so much. Any parting words? Beth, you want to go first since you have to run?
Yeah, let's just support each other in creating more nourished, healthy, balanced lives.
And hug more kittens.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is going to be my my new sort of motto, is this community care and community support. So let's all be there for each other, and let's keep the conversation going. I would love to hear more about what's working for others as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And speaking of communities of care, that is a really cool concept. And, when the COVID thing started, we did do support groups. We had them, I think, 3 times a week for a while. And they were there just for anybody, but they kind of turned into more of self-care for coaches and community care for coaches. And we stopped them because people didn't need them anymore. They said they didn't need them. But if that's something that us as Coach Aria should restart, tell me. If there's some other way that you think we can support this communities of care idea for, us in this little tiny Coach Aria universe that we have together, please send those suggestions and ideas. I mean, we're here for you and each other. So let's utilize the things that we have to help all of us together. Cool.
Amazing. Thank
Happy
you.
2021, everyone.
Thank you all, everyone. Yes.
See you here next week. We have a conversation on assessments. A bit different than this. And in about an hour and a half, I will be on LinkedIn interviewing a person who is a health and wellness and weight loss coach to learn about her journey and hopefully get some practical tips, because I've gained about 15 pounds since September. So join me for that if you like. Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.